in listen-only mode.
Good morning or afternoon to everyone. This is Alan Franklin speaking. I want to welcome you all to this webinar with Alexandra Lamont, who's the Deputy Director of Global Affairs Canada. A couple of housekeeping issues. Firstly, I would ask you to test that you should be able to see the screen with the first PowerPoint presentation slide. You also have on the right side of your screen, hopefully, a box where you can type in questions. What we're going to do is have the questions typed in by those who have questions for Alexandra at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions in any time. She won't be able to actually see the questions. I will be reading them out from my screen to Alexandra. Hopefully we'll have enough time to get through all of the questions. You might want to, at this point, a few of you try to type a test question just so that I can confirm that I'm seeing the questions properly so that I can present them to Alexandra at the end of the webinar. So the talk today is on the role of Global Affairs Canada in regard to assisting Canadian business. That's both in Canada and abroad, with particular reference to the services offered by the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, which is part of Global Affairs Canada. Now, in order to understand this role of global affairs, we need to understand that the federal government has policies regarding corporate social responsibility. And as you will hear during the webinar, the assistance provided by the Canadian government, particularly through the Trade Commissioner Service, is connected to their CSR policies and the obligation of Canadian companies to abide by these policies when operating abroad. And that is why the title of today's webinar is Canada's Corporate Social Responsibility Approach, because that's intimately connected with the services that are available to Canadian companies. As attendees, you should be able to hear the audio portion and see the PowerPoint presentation. Again, I think the best way of doing this will be for us to hold questions until the presentation is completed, and I will read them out, and hopefully Alexandra Lamont will be able to have time to answer all or most or all of the questions. So without further ado, I want to introduce Alexandra Lamont, Deputy Director of Global Affairs Canada, who is now going to go through the slide presentation and discuss the topics of today's seminar. So thanks very much, Alexandra, for agreeing to do this on short notice with us, and please take it away.
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks for having me to do this presentation by webinar. Maybe for a bit more background on my role and my position in Global Affairs Canada. I'm the Deputy Director of the basically the unit that deals with responsible business practices, and in that role we sit in the trade part of the department, reporting the end to the Chief Trade Commissioner, and our primary emphasis is trying to help our trade commissioners at Post help Canadian, and in our regional offices in Canada, help Canadian businesses on the ground with the sort of CSR aspects of operating abroad, with a focus on countries where that is a very pertinent issue. It's not everywhere, but certainly in some countries it's very, very important, and it's a major focus for our trade commissioners. And with that, I will continue. The first slide here, it was intended really just to give a sense of the course of the presentation and the key elements of Canada's corporate social responsibility approach abroad. I'm of course speaking from the perspective of Global Affairs Canada, so our mandate is exterior to Canada. Domestically, Industry Canada has a role, the primary role on CSR matters, and ESDC has the sort of the labor focus, but our focus is very much abroad. And with that, I would say, hold on, let me. With that, I think this next slide really addresses Government of Canada expectations for doing business the Canadian way. The Government of Canada and Global Affairs has ended up sort of, trying to outline very clearly what those expectations are for Canadian companies operating abroad. Now, this is not legally required, but this is something that it was felt was warranted, setting out, and it's something that was developed actually over time in close consultation with industry stakeholders, particularly in the extractives industry, because of the particular challenges that arise in that in those environments around the world. And it's done really because we're very aware that an issue involving any Canadian company abroad ends up tarnishing Canadian industry and businesses operating abroad as a whole, and the reputation of Canada in the field, and that's something that our posts abroad end up having to deal with. So, and it's can be serious to an extent that it goes beyond simply a reputational matter, but it can actually affect the security of Canadians abroad. It's our missions who might have to deal with demonstrations, etc., outside missions, and then provide consular support to Canadians who may find themselves in difficulties as a result of related matters. So it's important. It's been recognized as important for quite a long time, and this definition is what has been reached in terms of communicating expectations to Canadian businesses. Just the graph on the lower right-hand corner, there's an expectation that's intended to illustrate that Canadian companies are expected to follow the law, above and beyond that, do no harm, because we recognize that many operate in countries with weak governance, fragile states where the law may not be very well enforced, or the laws themselves may be less than perfect from the perspective of somebody coming from Canada, and then ideally to benefit. And as part of that, we're also, we recognize that there's the shared value proposition, that there's absolute benefits to Canadian companies by doing good CSR abroad, business, and that it can be completely crucial to their business success. And we're very aware of that, actually, with regards to the extractive sector and mining investments, where poor CSR can be something that derails or completely undermines and can result in the actual failure of a project. Okay, now this slide elaborates on the second one that outlines the Government of Canada's approach abroad, and I will be elaborating more specifically on the Trade Commissioner role, but we use this slide to sort of explain the sort of four main thematic areas under which we provide support or try to practice CSR related to support to Canadian companies. The first one, advice and guidance, has to do with a couple of aspects. One is that there are 6 international guidelines that are specifically sort of endorsed and that we promote, and these are found in our CSR strategy for the extractive sector, which there's a link found at the end of the slide presentation. But those are not all extractive specific, and I'll be elaborating on them a little bit after this. The Trade Commissioner role is a very practical role on the ground of sort of helping Canadian companies try to do good CSR depending on the challenges of that particular host country. And the CSR counselor, a fellow called Jeffrey Davidson, he has a specific mandate to help promote these standards and guidelines and help Canadian extractive sector companies be aware of what is expected of them. The second piece, fostering networks and partnerships, that's primarily the Trade Commissioner's role. So that will take place at posts at our missions and consulates around the world. We also have regional offices across the country with Trade Commissioners who are intended to, who are there to help businesses who wish to contact them there. And that's very much a role of taking advantage of trade commissioner networks and knowledge of, governments in host countries, civil society stakeholders, and business contacts to bring those groups together to work on CSR challenges and sort of to heighten awareness around CSR, depending on the challenges of the environment. If there are problems that become sort of significant, there are two dispute resolution mechanisms that can be triggered that Canada has. One is the CSR Councillor, Jeffrey Davidson, who's specific to the extractive sector, and the other one is the National Contact Point for the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises, and I will be elaborating on those quite at length later, so I won't dwell on them particularly now. The fourth element is one, and this is it doesn't fall strictly under the trade mandate of the department, but there's a broader awareness of the importance of strengthening the environment affecting good business practices, and that includes our development colleagues' efforts to build local capacity and to fulfill their mandate to reduce poverty in such a way that recognizing that sort of helping stabilize and assist the economic growth in foreign countries is actually one that's quite crucial, and that the CSR component is part of that. We include CSR references in and undertakings in our free trade agreements and our foreign investment protection agreements, and we also undertake quite a lot of anti-corruption initiatives and involvements. There's sort of international commitments, and we also are trying to help our trade commissioners with very practical tools and resources for Canadian companies on that front as well. Now, launching into the advice and guidance piece, or elaborating on it a bit more, the first and the sort of primary, or the start really, I think, to the CSR piece, foundational start, was established in 1976 when the OECD provided these guidelines for multinational enterprises, and Canada signed on. So it's something that has been a long-standing commitment by the Government of Canada. It's not, a new and recent involvement. It's something that can be expected to continue, and it's actually something that, if anything, is gaining in weight and in commitments and awareness. So the guidelines are quite comprehensive. They underwent an update in 2011, which added on, I think, the human rights, environmental aspects, the issues that are mentioned there. Canada has been a member since 1976. They are very involved. So we have government officials who attend these from Government Global Affairs Canada and work on the practical aspects of producing, coming to agreement on what those standards should be. With that in mind, there's an awareness that there's a need to have sort of very practical and applied guidance at the company level, and the OECD has been working on producing a number of these practical guides, which are listed. One for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas is explicitly endorsed in the CSR strategy, which was updated in 2014. The one on meaningful stakeholder engagement for the extractive sector is one that has been issued since then, and they have a couple more in development in response to the responsible supply chains response and recognizing the issues arising in that area. And these are the other endorsed guidelines in the CSR strategy, which was updated in 2014. The United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights is one that's very, very high level. It was Canada helped fund and the production of these, and it was led by a very well-respected individual by the name of John Ruggie, and it's something that really defines, what is states' responsibilities with regards to business and human rights versus what is a company's responsibility, and then so that to put greater clarity on that. And then I think these have come about really in response to, over time, criticisms arising over the role of multinationals and the power of companies abroad operating in states with weak and fragile governance, where there may not be the same robust regulatory systems to protect citizens, or even a lack of awareness of where responsibilities might fall. So those are an important and quite recent development that Canada's been very involved in supporting, but they're very high level. The second guideline is the International Financial Corporation Performance Standards. Those are the World Bank's. The IFC is effectively a World Bank financing arm, and in order to obtain World Bank financing, it is required that you meet those performance standards. Here in Canada, Export Development Canada applies those when they do their financing. So those are a very important practical set of guidelines for companies that are endorsed in the strategy. The Global Reporting Initiative, some of you may be familiar with, provides guidance on exactly how one might report on CSR, along CSR lines. The Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, that is an initiative that started up between a number of countries and businesses out of a recognition that there's a lot of companies, and again, particularly, this is particularly pertinent to the extractive sector, operating in weak and fragile states where, they're required to hire private security companies. They're effectively required to, or they need to provide levels of armed security, which increases the risk of human rights abuses or of violent activities taken against people in their business dealings. And it's a way to help them work with the security agencies in the countries in question. And again, Canada's sharing this year, again, out of our interest in supporting sort of the business and human rights angle, and understanding that this is something that's of great practical effect and usefulness to companies. I think it ends up providing, templates and very practical sort of memorandum of understanding that companies can follow, that they can use to work with local security agencies, be it the police, be it the army, and their own private security companies, in order to minimize the likelihood of violent outcomes of one sort or another. So we're cognizant that that's something that is of interest to quite a lot of companies, and something that also would, or could have a positive impact on or preventative effect on Canada's reputation. Last but far from least, we also are very open to using other CSR guidance and providing that to our trade commissioners, and through them to Canadian companies, including that developed in Canada. So 3 notable ones in the extractive sector are E3+, which is developed by Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, and Mining Association of Canada's Towards Sustainable Mining. Okay, so that sort of covers off the main guidance that we're providing, and is intended to give you a sense of what we are trying to, that there are a range of standards out there for companies to look to, and that they could apply depending on their own circumstances. The position that the government takes, again, is that companies should obey all laws abroad, but that there's a lot about that there is behavior above and beyond that, which it's highly desirable that they should follow, but that is voluntary in nature, that is unlikely to be strictly legislated, and and being voluntary, it's up to companies to figure out how to apply in their individual circumstances depending on what their own sort of needs and the challenges that they meet on the CSR aspects are. This slide is intended really more to explain a bit more to you how our missions abroad work internally, to give you a sense of both the support they can provide and sort of how they carry out our departmental mandates. Global Affairs Canada, we have embassies, consulates, and trade offices abroad in varying sizes depending on the host country and the importance of the relationship. We also participate in multilateral institutions such as the OECD and the UN, and also in international treaties and related arrangements. So this gives you a sense really of, there's sort of the division of labor internal to the department. Our foreign policy colleagues, have the overall, tend to manage the sort of the political relationships with the host country, the sort of broader political dynamics, and here it's described as promoting Canadian values, but they would have, for instance, pertinent to CSR, they would be the ones that are following human rights issues in the country. So, so we encourage the trade commissioners to work closely with these other colleagues to ensure that they have a sort of a whole of government and a complementary approach that is very thorough in achieving their own purposes. But the Trade Commissioner Service, which prior to 1982 was actually at Industry Canada and not internal to this department, they have the mandate to promote Canadian industry and so to promote Canadian businesses. And they'll be the main point of contact with Canadian companies and then with the business community abroad. I mean, they will also have contacts with the local and national government. It's a bit of a misnomer to say that the foreign policy, representatives abroad, they do not have a monopoly on that, but the mandate of our trade commissioners abroad is to assist Canadian companies abroad and help them, try to help them achieve a success with their endeavors there. And the last one, and this is a more recent advent into the department, are our development colleagues. Formerly, the Canadian International Development Agency was a standalone agency, and it was brought into the department a number of years ago. And their mandate, and the mandate for the money spent on their programs, is to promote sustainable development towards poverty reduction. So poverty reduction is their main goal, and their efforts must be directed towards that. But they have very good contacts as a result of that, with non-governmental organizations, with sort of consultants, with civil society organizations, and we strongly encourage, from a CSR perspective, all three to work in a complementary manner together. It's very important, and I do need to point this out. I mean, we do not want, and it's not in anybody's interest, that Canada's foreign policy abroad be seen as completely subject to its trade interests. Those are important, but they should only be part of, again, a whole of government approach. And so that's the reason why we have this sort of very distinct, differences between the mandates of these groups as a whole. I mean, that's something that will be, taken into account at the head of mission level, but at the specialized level, people are going to be advancing under their own mandate. All right. So practically speaking, the Trade Commissioner Service on the ground, and this is where Alan asked me to explain to you what the basic functions of the actual Trade Commissioner Service are, and I have those enumerated somewhere. One moment. I mean, the main purpose of the trade commissioners is to help Canadian industry abroad and Canadian businesses in particular. So their four basic services are helping businesses prepare for international markets, helping them assess the potential of the markets in which they're thinking of operating in, finding qualified contacts, and that's where trade commissioners have a very strong advantage, being posted abroad, and also resolving business problems. I mean, there's somebody that businesses can come to when they're having a problem of one sort or another, and we have lengthy experience in figuring out, where we can provide advice we do, or if we know where you can find it, we try to direct you put you in the right direction. In a CSR perspective, which is really more what this slide speaks to, we're asking trade commissioners to communicate those expectations that were described in that earlier slide to Canadian businesses abroad. They're encouraged to promote CSR events. We have an internal fund to help them arrange these things, to promote the CSR strategy in Canada's approach, and also to let companies and others know, actually, of Canada's dialogue facilitation mechanisms of the NCP and the Councillor. Our unit acts as a resource to try to help, in a responsive manner, but help trade commissioners provide guidelines and tools and be a sort of a resource for companies depending on local markets. In certain markets, we have long-standing trade commissioners and local employees who have very strong expertise and have worked in this area for a long time, because Peru would be one that that's notable, for instance. Where CSR issues are very pertinent in the host country in a matter of extended and debate, and where mining and the developmental challenges and the CSR challenges around that are present, then if there's a Canadian business presence, then it's likely that our Canadian trade commissioners there will be quite knowledgeable about the subject. And also the last item there is the link to developmental capacity building initiatives, because our development colleagues, there's quite an emphasis particularly on trying to support host countries, build up by capacity building, it means helping them to develop their internal governmental ability to really deal with a sector such as the extractive sector in such a way that they can respond adequately in a regulatory fashion and take full advantage and benefit fully from the presence of this activity in their country. So the dialogue facilitation mechanisms, these are, I'm going to be speaking to them for a number of slides, and I don't want to sort of overdo them, but it is worthwhile explaining to you how they function. But I would also like to register that the vast majority of Canadian business activity abroad takes place without huge problems, but these are in place should there be should anything arise. But we have 170 missions around the world. A great many of them have mining or extractive sector activity, and we're not completely deluged. The number that actually come up with problems, relatively speaking, related to Canadian business activity abroad is small. However, the need has been identified, and these have been put in place to help address that. So again, the Office of the CSR Counselors, which presently inhabited by a fellow called Jeffrey Davidson, who's a long-standing, has long-standing CSR experience in the extractive sector. He came to the position from a job at Queen's University in the mining faculty. Prior to that, he'd worked for the World Bank in Australia and Venezuela, I think, for 4 years, and he has spent years in the field in Latin America and elsewhere working on this sort of thing. The counselor was set up in 2009 at actually the express request of the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Harper at the time. He deals only with extractive sector challenges. And his role is really to advise and review, and there's a focus on him taking on, there we go, early stage problem resolution, and under his new mandate of the 2014 updated strategy, he was given the role of taking on really trying to get in and do early intervention to kind of nip problems in the bud and prevent them from escalating into more sort of serious and long-standing disputes. The National Contact Point was created in 2000, again under the OECD guidelines. It deals with all sectors, so they could entertain a case under the OECD guidelines, that arose, a complaint that arose in any sector. The structure that we have for that is that the NCP itself consists of representatives from 7 Government of Canada departments, so that it brings in expertise. I think Industry Canada, INAC, ESDC, to bring in expertise across government to bear on any case that comes forward, and they are intended to look at sort of the more complex and long-standing issues. And these are non-judicial mechanisms. They're there to provide. They're not there to replace, legal procedures, but they're to provide something that's sort of quicker, more timely, less expensive, and perhaps in a way a bit less of a challenge than some more formal systems may be to complainants. And the TCS. So the TCS are aware of these, and they are. They could refer a company to either one, or a stakeholder, or anybody who is raising an issue with a mining company in the case of the CSR Council, or any company in the case of the National Contact Point. Right. So I think I've mainly covered that. The National Contact Point was this. Canada's been a signatory since 1976 to the Declaration and the guidelines. Established a National Contact Point in 2000, and there are 46 members have them. So it is a function that has been seen to have some use elsewhere. And this network also allows the National Contact Point to sort of communicate on if an issue arises, because it tends to arise. If the NCP here could take on a case arising within Canada, but it'll also, primarily actually I would say, has dealt with cases arising in other countries. So the NCP role is to promote awareness of the OECD guidelines and respond to questions about them. It's supposed to contribute to the resolution of issues arising when somebody's brought a complaint forward. It reports annually to the OECD Investment Committee, and it has had 17 cases in Canada since 2000, the majority of them having to do with the extractive sector. And perhaps most importantly, under the 2014 CSR strategy for the extractive sector, a new provision was brought in, which stated that trade advocacy support provided by Global Affairs Canada through the Trade Commissioner Service, and possibly economic support from EDC might be withheld or withdrawn should a company not, show good CSR performance and not cooperate with either the NCP or the councillor. And the very first instance in which such a case occurred was last year, a case called China Gold, where a company, China Gold, there was a complaint to the NCP. China Gold was not willing to cooperate with the NCP. They rebuffed, I think, three inquiries from the NCP about this complaint, and the decision was made to recommend the withdrawal, or to actually withdraw trade advocacy support from China Gold and make that public, which is perhaps the most the key aspect of that. And that was successful in gaining the attention of China Gold, who has since re-engaged with the NCP. But that was quite a significant development, and Canada was recognized actually by John Ruggie, who wrote the UN Guiding Principles, as being the only country that has any sort of material consequences for a company not, engaging with its dialogue facilitation mechanisms or on the CSR front at all. Again, the counselor's role is to promote understanding among extractive sector stakeholders of the government CSR expectations, help companies align with standards and guidelines pertinent to their policies and practices, and again, work on early detection of emerging issues and situations. So again, his focus is an early one. In terms of an engagement process, the counselor might hear of a problem to do with a Canadian extractive sector company from a range of sources. It could be from a trade commissioner at post. It could be from being contacted directly by a complainant of some sort. And they can then follow up with the company and engage to see if they can assist them. And the overarching push is to try to help companies improve their CSR performance. He can recommend or refer the issue to the NCP if he feels that it's something that's better suited to the NCP's function. But in the case were he to engage with a company and feel that they were not operating in good faith and they were not demonstrating good CSR, he could again provide advice really to the Trade Commissioner Service as to whether this company should be provided with trade advocacy support. And this is also, in the case of China Gold, this information was provided to Export Development Canada. So any decision not to provide trade advocacy support by the Trade Commissioner Service EDC will be informed. They're an arm's length organization. They'll make their own call, but it's something they will be made aware of. So here, this really, basically to sum up, these are quite important consequences, and these are consequences which are not currently imposed by any other country that we know of. And really, the overall effort is to, and we have quite widespread support in the extractive sector for this approach. They're looking for, they do not wish themselves to be associated with companies that are poor performers. So the significant consequences are that a company name could be made public if they are not prepared to engage with the NCP or the VCSR and not undertaking good CSR on the ground. This really describes that, it'll be made a final statement by the NCP. We're working with the councillor as to exactly how. He's not yet had a case to apply this to, but in the end I imagine he would also make a public recommendation. We're sort of working out the details of how that would apply. But this is really a key aspect of the new strategy, and Canada is quite unprecedented in this approach, and has been recognized again by John Ruggie for doing this. And really, again, it's an effort to provide, Canadian leadership, I would say, in this field, and to both provide an approach which has a strong emphasis on helping Canadian companies perform better, providing the resources for them to do good CSR wherever they operate abroad, through the support to the Trade Commissioner Service, through the resources that can be provided, but to have something in place that will enable the Government of Canada to distance itself really from those companies that willfully do not. Now, there's not because the policy is, and I'm almost wrapping up here, I'm aware of the time, because CSR is voluntary and companies are expected to, sort of figure out how it best applies to their own circumstances wherever they are operating globally. We have not provided, a sort of a checklist of what a company must do to get trade advocacy support or not. And rather than that, we've actually determined that the best sort of test really is to is to determine whether or not a company is acting good faith in engaging with the VCSR and also in their CSR practices on the ground, because we recognize that there are a very wide range of companies, and particularly in the extractive sector where you might have junior exploratory mining companies with a very, very small number of personnel. Their capacity to undertake CSR, to even to know about it, is very limited, and we want to be in a position primarily, first of all, to help them improve their CSR on the ground and to make a success of their operations abroad, and only to have the NCP or the VCSR, the removal of trade advocacy support, really kick in if there's not a good faith effort to comply. So with that, this last slide, if you want to contact the Trade Commissioner Service or find somebody at a particular post, the first website is probably the one you want to look at. To read through the entire CSR strategy in 2014, that's the second website. The Councillor's website is in the process still of being updated, the third one, and the National Contact Point with all the decisions, including the China Gold one, will be found on the fourth point there. So with that, I will turn over, I guess, to Alan to see if we have any questions.
Thanks for that wonderful presentation, Alexandra. I can hear the applause virtually. No, just kidding. A few questions have come up for you, and I thank those people who have submitted questions. The first one is, you referred to the trade advocacy support that the government provides. Can you give us some more detail about what that support consists of?
Sure. I mean, I think most importantly, maybe for a company, Canadian company operating abroad, I would say business contacts in the host country in question, but of particular import is the ability to, if you're having a problem, with customs, with some kind of problem with the government of the host country, and you're facing a regulatory challenge or, some difficulty with customs, you can approach a trade commissioner, and it is possible. They have an access to the host country governments, which businesses may not always have. And so, but at the same time, we're very cognizant that, Canada, and a big part of the reason behind the CSR strategy is that Canada does not want to put its name beside, or it sort of, give a seal of approval to a company which is not performing in a way they feel they should be. So any activity really that sort of ends up putting a Government of Canada stamp of approval on a particular company. So, kind of advocating for them on an individual basis with the government, or with other business contacts. Sort of more general things like invitations to a sort of an industry-wide function, that might be less of an issue. But anything like that, where there's a description actually, and the Trade Commissioner, I don't know if the description is actually on our external website, but the Trade Commissioner will have a sense. But that's sort of, on principle, that's the dividing line. It's, is the Government of Canada basically going to be putting its sort of own reputation on the line if it, carries on this activity with this company?
Thanks for that. And just sort of as a follow-up question to that, as an example, because we know a lot of companies have run into this situation where they're operating abroad and bribe demands are made of the company. Is that something where the company can go to the Trade Commissioner and say, listen, this is what's happening, can you go to bat for us to try and have those bribe demands withdrawn from the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to boost our support to trade commissioners in terms of the tools that they can provide to companies to prepare for that. I mean, that is companies' responsibility themselves, of course, to have good compliance systems in place. But absolutely, I mean, I think that's something that's worth alerting. There's probably a range, depending on the post and and the environment, there may be a range of what they can do, but I've certainly, you know, one gal in my unit said that they will take, in her last posting, you know, they would go directly in and make complaints. You know, I mean, not all trade commissioners may feel they're able to do that, but I think all should feel, should be in a position to say, okay, we think this is what you can do to, you know, these are contacts you may wish to make to sort of band together with other people to try to address that problem. You know, they should have a list of local lawyers, or, you know, of lawyers, whether they be, you know, in the host country or Canadian or other lawyers operating there, that they can provide. They should be, I think it is absolutely worthwhile, because it's good for them to know, and they may well be in a position to provide useful advice and actually act on it by approaching the host government. I can't promise that they would approach the host government, but it's something that has been done in the past.
Thanks for that. And just again on the same issue, um, it seems often that there's a tension between the various departments of the government when these things come up, because you've got foreign affairs saying, well, if we approach the government, it could somehow interfere with our you know, international relations with that government. So is the division now with the trade commissioners, are they separate enough that they can deal with those issues without having to worry about stepping on the toes of the foreign affairs side of the government?
I think, well, I mean, it would depend a little bit, I think, on the nature of the problem that was being brought forward. But I mean, my understanding is that the Trade Commissioner Service, this is something they've always tried to assist companies with. You know, I mean, I can't speak to all circumstances, but you know, I mean, it's a problem for the host government if they have people doing that, right? And it may well be a problem which they themselves, you know, that the host government themselves may be seeking to stamp out, right? So I think, you know, the idea that any such complaint, you know, they may see that they actually such a, you know, raising such a concern and acting to help, you know, your host government stamp out that kind of activity may be something that's actually quite welcome. You know, again, I can't speak to it would depend very much on the circumstances of the country in question, but you know, I think it's absolutely worth raising with the Trade Commissioner, and it's something that posts may very well be equipped to help.
Great.
With.
Thanks. Another question has come in is, how does the Trade Commission view, just trying, philanthropy within the CSR when conducted in foreign nations? Does this have a potential to violate the CFPOA when ongoing business and new business opportunities arrives in foreign investments?
That's a very good question, actually, and I'm glad that it was asked, because philanthropy actually is something that, corporate philanthropy is something actually we usually distinguish as not being CSR, and as something that that actually is something that you know, companies may find themselves exactly rendered more vulnerable by providing. We very strongly, I mean, I kind of didn't have the time to get into it today, but you know, we strongly recognize that, you know, companies don't want to end up sort of in the position of being seen as a you know, as sort of a sugar daddy, you know, as somebody to come to for handouts all the time. And the best advice actually is not to make themselves the sort of focus of attention, but to push, and this is a big part of the reason behind our emphasis on you know, engaging with local stakeholders, particularly on these massive development, such as in the extractive sector, where you're really doing economic development for an entire, you know, community or region. You know, to push back on the local community and to sort of engage with them in such a way so that they define, you know, where these investments, you know, if they want to work with a company, you know, so that you work with the local community and stakeholders to find out what they want and where they want those investments to be made at a community level, not at a sort of an individual level, right? So you're not just going in and building a school, you know, sort of on a whim, but that the you know, if anything on that scale is done, you know, with an idea of where the community as a whole wants it. And that's where actually the contacts with our developmental colleagues can come in very usefully, because they'll have a sense of sort of the larger developmental viewpoint of a community or a host country and where they want to go, you know, and where a corporate activity on that front could come in. But we actually actively, you know, dissociate corporate philanthropy from CSR. And actually discourage it to quite an extent. I mean, sensitivity, for instance, and we said you know, the advice provided, and there are these, we have handouts which are probably linkable on the CSR website or the Trade Commissioner website. You know, like thinking very carefully about local procurement and, you know, trying to do things so that you procure locally would be more of something that's encouraged under CSR. Or, you know, in local hiring practices and having great sensitivity in local hiring practices, you know, as to who you're hiring and the dynamics of the local community and the relationships within the local community when you do that, you know, and just going in with a very, you know, cultivated awareness of how you approach that is what we're trying to encourage, you know, rather than, you know, what is thought of as strictly corporate philanthropy.
Thanks a lot for that answer. And just sort of on that same note, you know, the supply chain issues are becoming, you know, major for companies. Is that something that the Trade Commissioner department can help you with? In other words, you want to engage locally, but you want to make sure that you're going to engage with the supplier who's not going to be using slave labor, for example. Can the Trade Commission Service sort of help us to find the suppliers who are, you know, have integrity?
I think, yeah. I mean, you know, the purpose, the Trade Commissioner Service is there to help provide qualified contacts. You know, I mean, they're not there to provide sort of binding legal advice of any sort, and, you know, companies are always expected to do their own, you know, due diligence insofar as they can. You know, I think you can't expect the Trade Commissioner Service to do all of that for you, but they should be able to provide, you know, useful advice in that regard.
And I think the last question we have time for is, what is the training that the trade commissioners receive before they're posted?
We do a CSR specific training. I mean, when people join the department and join the Trade Commissioner Service, they receive quite a lot of, you know, initial training about the job and what their, you know, what the responsibilities will entail. And I mean, really, then thereafter, it's, you know, I mean, as a Trade Commissioner gains experience on the job on postings, they're, you know, they become expert in that field, and the training before you go abroad on a posting would be probably more specific to the country you're going to. You know, it might be sort of intercultural training. It would be training that focuses probably on there's training provided that is focused on the sectors, you know, of wherever your posting is, whatever sector you may be going to concentrate on. You know, people also learn on the job at headquarters. You know, we have a division, you know, units that concentrate on supporting particular sectors, particular geographics, and so, you know, there'd be that on the job learning. But there's you know, we have a whole internal learning shop that does nothing but actually concentrate on training global affairs officers across a whole wide range of subjects. So it depends a little bit. I would say it depends a little bit on the posting where you're going, and, you know, the sectors and the challenges that you're going to encounter there. But then incoming trade commissioners would have a sort of a standard training on what is involved in being a trade commissioner.
Thanks very much. I think we're running out of time, so I want to say thank you to you, Alexandra Lamont, for taking the time in your busy schedule to provide this webinar for our students. I want to thank all the students who have attended for your attendance and your questions. And the PowerPoint presentation will be made available to everybody after the webinar is completed. If you have any questions, you can go to the websites that are on the screen that's being presented right now, and we're looking forward to future webinars of this nature. Last thing I wanted to mention is for the students who are taking my course on international legal business risk management, one of the slides mentioned the IFC performance standards, and we will be attending a seminar in Washington with the IFC where they'll go into great detail on those guidelines for us. So I'm looking forward to that. And this was a great introduction to that, to what that seminar will be about. So thank you all, and we look forward to having you attend the next in these series of webinars. And thank you very much, Alexandra, again for your time.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone.